Hi guys, welcome to Fingtem Languages. Today I'm going to explain how to pronounce the R sound in Spanish, which is one of the most difficult sounds for people that are learning Spanish or any other language that uses this R sound, this trilled R sound that is so difficult for us native English speakers to pronounce, and also for native speakers of many languages that don't use this trilled R sound. I should mention up front that there's actually two distinct R sounds in Spanish. So there's not just one that we're going to be dealing with in this video. We're going to talk about both of them. One is, I find, a lot easier to pronounce, and the other one is much more difficult. But they do both merit their own discussion. So we're going to take time to explain both of those sounds. One from a linguistic and a more scientific or anatomical perspective with what's going on in your mouth and what a linguist would say about the different things that are going on when you produce the sound. And also I'm going to try to explain it in a way that's a little bit more simple for anyone that's not a linguist or anyone that doesn't have extensive training in phonology. I have done a few videos on this channel before about linguistics, about phonology, phonetics, and just the science behind what's going on with your mouth and your tongue and your lips and your vocal cords when you produce these sounds. So I would highly recommend going back and watching those to get a good basis in phonology and phonetics, just to help you understand more of what's going on in your mouth. And if you're not subscribed yet and this sounds interesting to you, consider subscribing, because I do upload new videos just about every week having to do with linguistics and language learning. And so I'm here to help you guys try to learn your languages better and more efficiently. So let's get started on these R's. Like I said, there's two main R sounds in Spanish. You have what we call in linguistics your tapped R or your flapped R, and then your trilled R. The tap is I believe a little bit easier, kind of a simpler concept to grasp. So that's the one we're going to start with. And then we're going to move on to this trilled R, or the rolled R, which is the one that usually gives language learners a lot more difficulty. So if you haven't done any research on the IPA, I would recommend learning a lot about this. The IPA is the International Phonetic Alphabet, and it's just a tool that linguists use to represent speech sounds on paper, because as we all know, spelling and just regular old letters in the English language or the Spanish language, they can be very confusing, and we spell things just very weird. So in phonetics, we have a specific symbol that we use to represent this tapped R, and that is just a very simple, my marker's not very good, it's just a very simple curved line like this, and that is what, maybe do a little line there, and that is what you call your voiced alveolar tap. And what that means is that every speech sound has three parts to it, okay, that we can use to describe it. If a sound is voiced, that means that you're going to be activating your vocal cords while you're pronouncing the sound. Alveolar has to do with the place that your tongue makes contact with your mouth. So this is a voiced alveolar flap. So you're going to be placing your tongue against your alveolar ridge, which is a little bump right behind your teeth. And that's where you would make contact with your mouth in English when you're pronouncing T's and D's, or N's, or L sound, your light L sound. And then the last part of the description is the flap. And what that means is that you're going to be taking your tongue and you're just going to give it a little flick up against the top of your mouth to just very briefly stop the airflow, and then let it back through again. So you have sounds like T's and D's, where you're going to actually put your tongue up against that alveolar ridge and stop the airflow and let a little bit of pressure build up before you release it. You're not doing that with your tap. You're just flicking your tongue up against there and just very briefly stopping the airflow and then allowing it to go through again. Now, that's probably going way over most of your heads. This is not a concept that we think about very often. You're not always thinking about what's going on with your tongue when you're speaking. To make it very easy for those who are native speakers of English, American English or Canadian English or Australian English specifically, among other languages, this is the sound that we make when we say butter or edit or video. Pretty much anytime you have a T or a D that is sandwiched between two vowel sounds, with the first vowel sound being stressed. So video. You're not saying video, you're saying video. And that vowel, that consonant sound in between the I and the O is a flap. And that's exactly what you're trying to produce here with this simple R. So for example, if you want to pronounce the Spanish word para, P-A-R-A, in the IPA, you would spell it out like this. Para. You would spell it out like this, just basically the same way it's spelled in Spanish. And it's very tempting for us to say para and just kind of follow the phonotactics of the English language, but you don't want to do that if you want to sound more like a native speaker. If you say para, that's going to give you away right away that you have a very thick gringo accent or non-native accent in Spanish. So a very easy trick for learning to pronounce this word correctly is to start off by saying the English word Potter, as in Harry Potter. And in English, the way we pronounce that word is like this. It probably depends on your dialect or your accent, your regional accent. But in America, most of us would pronounce the word Potter like this. Okay? And if this doesn't make sense, that's totally fine. You don't need to know all the linguistic details in order to learn from this. Essentially, what we're going to do is have that last sound at the end of Potter. We're going to convert that to an sound. So instead of Potter, we're going to say para. And then the only other change we really need to do there is just make a little adjustment to our P, where you're not giving it that little puff of air, that little aspiration. And we're going to say para. And if you can say Potter in English in an American English accent, it might be a little bit more difficult if you're British or Irish or something. But if you can say Potter the way I say it, then it's not very difficult at all to learn how to say para. And you have to remember not to pronounce that R in the American way. So that is the basics of the flapped or the tapped R in Spanish. Not extremely difficult, so we won't spend a ton of time on it. The more difficult one is what we called the trilled R, or a lot of people call it a rolled R, that drrrr sound, that machine gun going off in your mouth. That, if you didn't grow up using this sound in your native language, then it's just very difficult to try to figure out how to actually produce that sound. And the technical term for this speech sound in Spanish it's called a voiced alveolar trill. Okay, I'll write this down here because those are three important words to know. Voiced alveolar trill. Okay. Voiced, we already encountered this in the flap. Voiced means that your vocal cords are being activated. And if you can think of the difference between a Z sound and an S sound, the only difference between those two sounds is voicing. And in fact, if you go back and forth between an S and a Z, put your hand up against your vocal cords right here on your Adam's apple, and you'll feel your vocal cords vibrating when you do the Z sound. You could do the same thing with an F and a V sound. That V sound is voiced. Your Z sound is voiced, and your voiced alveolar trill, your trilled R, is going to be voiced as well. Okay, alveolar, we already encountered this. It means your tongue is going to be making contact with your alveolar ridge, which I can't point to in the camera. I guess I can, it's right there, right behind your teeth. And then trill, if you have ever played the clarinet or the flute, you're probably familiar with this term as it relates to music. When a flute player does a trill, they're going back and forth very quickly between two different notes. And so that's what a trill is in music. In linguistics, a trill just means that you have some articulator, in this case your tongue, flapping back and forth very rapidly against the top of your mouth, and it's kind of producing that machine gun sound where it's allowing air through in very short little bursts very rapidly. And it's extremely difficult to do if you don't have this sound in your native language. So what I recommend for starting to be able to get this trill down is to start off by trying to make a purring sound. Try to sound like a cat. Play around with your tongue a little bit, play around with your mouth and your different articulators on the inside, and see if you can get a rapid purring sound. So if you can do the, if you can do that, that's a voiceless alveolar trill, and if you can get that far, then it's very easy to just add the voicing and get your trilled R, your voiced alveolar trill. If you can't quite get that, if you can get it somewhere else in your mouth, then that's going to be a good start. For example, in some dialects of French, like if you listen to Edith Piaf sing Je ne regrette rien, I don't regret anything. If you can listen to her pronouncing that, you'll hear her doing a uvular trill, where she's trilling the back of her throat, and it sounds kind of like, I can't do it right now, my throat's kind of dry. Need some water. Sounds more like, I don't know if you can hear that or not. It sounded pretty bad. But you're allowing the back of your tongue just vibrate very quickly against your uvula in the back. And if you can kind of play around with that, don't do it when someone else is around. But maybe if you're alone in the bathroom, you can look in the mirror, try to look and see what your tongue is doing. Often you won't be able to see the movements of a trill because it happens so fast. Try to play around with it. Try to move that vibrations forward in your mouth until you can get the very tip of your tongue to be the part that's vibrating. And that's what you want. You want the very front tip of your tongue to be vibrating against your alveolar ridge very quickly. And then if you can get to that voiceless alveolar trill, that, and if you can kind of get that cat sound, all you do is simply add in the voicing. Just like you would add voicing to an S sound to make it into a Z. And if that's hard to grasp, but just play around with your S and your Z's, or your V's and your F's, and you'll start to notice that voicing, that vibration in your throat. Now I want to talk about some misconceptions that have to do with just producing this sound. Okay, this is not an active movement. Okay, you're not controlling your tongue and causing it to go up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Okay, your brain can't work that fast. You can't control your tongue to move it that fast. What you're doing is you're going to relax your tongue in your mouth, and which is probably partially why I can't do it right now. Ironically, this is a good tip. Ironically, it's easier to do these things in the shower, I've found. When you're nice and relaxed and you get that warm water coming down, and you can just allow the air to pass through, and it's just easier because you're just nice and relaxed. But what you want to do is get your tongue kind of flaccid and just relaxed, and then allow that air to flow past it. And that's going to be what causes it to flap back and forth really quick. And again, it's not like moving your hand, right? Where you cause your hand to go up and down. It's like, if you can imagine the wind blowing my hand, and then you just let it kind of go very loose. That's what's happening. And then you're allowing the wind moving through your mouth to cause it to flap up and down against the top of your mouth. And you just want to, and this isn't, you have to realize, you have to be able to mentally comprehend that you're not trying to do something similar to an English R. Okay, this is not related to the R really in almost any way, other than the fact that it does have a little bit to do with your alveolar ridge. So if you can pronounce an R in English, R. And yeah, it's just not close. It's not close to that. It's closer. Think of something closer to a D or a T, where you are putting your tongue up against your alveolar ridge, but it's just much less controlled. Okay, it is controlled because you're not just letting your tongue do whatever it wants, but you're taking away some of your agency there. You're relaxing your tongue a little bit and allowing it to flap, unlike with a D or a T, where you're kind of giving it that firm strength to push